progress, we will repeal the Patriot Act.
Now that Ron Paul's heroic presidential campaign is drawing to a close, millions of liberty lovers nationwide are asking themselves what they can do to continue promoting his cause in a large-scale fashion. Well, I recently scored an exclusive interview with Libertarian presidential nominee Gary Johnson, who says voting for him will help make major inroads for the movement.
First promise I'm making if elected President of the United States is I promise to submit a balanced budget to Congress. Now, that isn't promising to balance the budget, that is promising to submit a balanced budget to Congress, which would be a $1.4 trillion reduction in federal spending. The next promise I'm making is I promise to veto any legislation where expenses exceed revenue. Congress is going to end up overriding my veto. But I just suggest to you that with those two promises, spending will be lower than any other scenario that you could possibly come up with. Because submitting a balanced budget to Congress, a $1.4 trillion reduction in federal spending, imagine the debate and the discussion that goes along with a $1.4 trillion reduction in federal spending.
The United States' sluggish economy and high corporate tax rate is also prompting the former New Mexico governor to lobby for tax reform.
I am also advocating on the part of the fair tax. I'm advocating throwing out the entire federal tax system. So no more income tax, no more corporate tax, no more withholdings from your payroll check. Replacing all of that with the fair tax, which is a 23% consumption tax, which ends up being cost neutral over a very short amount of time. It's really the answer to making American goods and services competitive. It's the answer when it comes to exports and China. And in a zero corporate tax rate environment, if the private sector does not create tens of millions of jobs, I don't know under what case the private sector would create tens of millions of jobs.
According to the Commission on Presidential Debates, third-party candidates can appear on the same stage as the Democratic and Republican nominees if 5 pre-selected polling organizations have them polling at 15% or greater, and if they are on enough state ballots, which Gary Johnson is. Despite the media blackout Gary Johnson is experiencing, respected polling firm PPP currently has him polling at 7% nationally and at over 20% in his home state.
If the Libertarian candidate for president gets 5% of the general election vote, something that has never happened before, but I'm going to suggest that that is a real possibility. If that happens, the Libertarian Party would receive $90 million in federal matching funds, which would be an absolute game changer.
While many view Johnson's campaign as inconsequential, the candidate, as well as many of his supporters, vehemently disagree.
I also think that from a message standpoint, that when you and I, as human beings, hear the same message coming from different sources, that it resonates a little bit more. We come to understand it a little bit better. So oftentimes Ron Paul is labeled as kooky. I don't think anything Ron Paul says is kooky. But if people who say he's kooky hear the same message from a couple different people, not just Ron Paul, I think what they're going to end up doing is go, I get it. I get it. I didn't really understand it when I heard it from Ron Paul. I didn't really understand it when I heard it from Gary Johnson. But now that I'm hearing it from so many different sources, I get it. I get it, and this is what we should be supporting as Americans.
And for InfoWars viewers who often feel as if their voices are not being heard, the candidate offered these words of encouragement.
Let's look at the war on drugs. Let's look at legalizing marijuana. 4 months ago, Gallup poll, 50% of Americans support legalizing marijuana. The reason for that is people are talking about the issue. Ultimately, in this country, who's responsible for people talking about this issue? It's the Libertarian Party.
Always fighting on behalf of liberty, on behalf of Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com, I'm David Ortiz.